I thought it was just a family visit, until my girlfriend's sister whispered, "This will stay between us." It started like any other visit, except nothing about that afternoon would feel ordinary to me afterward. I had come over to my girlfriend's home on a rainy Saturday, expecting the usual cozy chatter, the clink of coffee cups, and the faint scent of her cooking. What I hadn't expected was her sister. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, effortlessly graceful even in something casual, a soft sweater that hinted at her shape without trying, jeans that seemed to belong on her. She glanced up at me with that calm, measured confidence that only comes with life experience, yet there was a vulnerability in her eyes, like someone who had learned to hide it behind a carefully curated exterior. Our first words were polite, light, almost formal, but I felt it immediately, the quiet undercurrent between us. We moved to the living room after introductions. She sat down on the couch, her posture relaxed, one leg tucked under her. I found myself sitting on the edge of the opposite armchair, careful to give space, yet the narrowness of the room drew us closer than I expected. Then it happened. Her knee brushed mine, briefly, almost accidentally, and a small jolt ran through me. I looked at her, half expecting her to apologize, but she only gave a soft smile, one that lingered longer than necessary, and my heart twisted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Her presence was magnetic without trying. The way she held her mug, fingers wrapped around it as if it anchored her, made me notice the subtleties, the warmth of her hands, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she laughed, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. When she leaned slightly forward to emphasize a point, the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the earthy aroma of rain seeping through the windows, a combination that was unexpectedly intoxicating. We talked about ordinary things at first, the weather, her work, a few shared memories of our mutual friend, my girlfriend. But the conversation had an unspoken depth. Her voice was soft, inviting, and somehow private, as though the room existed just for the two of us despite the occasional clatter from the kitchen. I found myself listening differently, noticing the subtle inflections, the slight tilt of her head when she considered a question, the way her lips curved when she smiled but didn't speak. There was a strange comfort in that accidental closeness, a tension that didn't need words to exist. Every glance carried a weight, every laugh shared a quiet intimacy. It wasn't dangerous, not yet, but it was a spark I couldn't ignore. I caught myself stealing moments to observe her, to see how light played across her hair, how her eyes crinkled near the corners, and how she seemed both fully herself and partially untouchable at the same time. By the time my girlfriend returned, the room felt charged in a way I couldn't explain. The accidental touch, the soft laughter, the warm brush of her hand against mine on the arm of the chair, it all lingered in my chest long after the moment had passed. And I knew, even then, that this ordinary visit had changed something between us. It was one of those rare quiet afternoons when the house seemed almost suspended in stillness. My girlfriend had stepped out to run errands, leaving her sister and me alone. The atmosphere was casual, but I could feel a subtle shift in the air, as if the room had expanded to make space for something unspoken between us. She was at the bookshelf, organizing a few volumes that had slipped out of place. I offered to help, a simple gesture, but somehow it felt like more. As we reached for the same book, our hands brushed, briefly, almost timidly, but the warmth that radiated through that touch lingered. She didn't pull away. Instead, she paused, her fingers hovering near mine, and gave a soft, knowing smile. My heart thudded in a way that made me acutely aware of her presence, aware of every subtle movement. We started talking then, not about the books, but about life. She spoke quietly of frustrations, of moments where she had felt overlooked or misunderstood. I listened, trying to absorb every nuance, noticing the soft tremor in her voice when she recounted something particularly personal. There was a vulnerability in her words that contrasted sharply with the confident exterior she wore so effortlessly. I wanted to reach out, to bridge that gap, but I hesitated, knowing the boundaries that should not be crossed. And yet, the magnetic pull was undeniable. When she laughed, it wasn't just a sound, it was a warm vibration that seemed to hum through the room. I noticed the way her fingers traced the edge of the shelf absent-mindedly, the subtle tilt of her head as she searched for the right words, the quiet way she lingered near me without realizing it. Every detail imprinted itself in my mind, creating a tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She paused, looking directly at me, her eyes locking with mine in a way that made the room shrink around us. For a brief moment, it felt as though we were the only two people in existence. I felt the subtle heat of her hand brushing mine again, not intentional, perhaps, but electric nonetheless. My pulse quickened, my chest tightened, and I realized that this wasn't just a casual conversation. There was something unspoken, a connection that neither of us dared to name yet, but which thrummed quietly in every shared glance and soft laugh. I caught myself watching the way sunlight fell across her hair, the gentle sway as she shifted her weight, the slight exhales she made when she reached for a book above my head. Each detail seemed magnified, as if my senses were tuned only to her. And in that quiet intimacy, I felt a curious mix of guilt and longing, guilt for the thoughts stirring inside me, longing for the warmth of her presence, for the comfort and quiet thrill of these stolen moments. By the time my girlfriend returned, the tension had not dissipated. It lingered, subtle and unspoken, like a secret humming beneath the surface of our casual conversation. That afternoon, simple gestures, a shared reach for a book, a lingering glance, the warmth of proximity, had shifted something imperceptibly, yet irrevocably, between us. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. After that afternoon, I couldn't stop replaying the moments with her sister in my mind. It was strange, even unsettling, how a few accidental touches, shared glances, and quiet conversations could occupy so much of my thoughts. Every time I tried to focus on my girlfriend or my usual routine, her face would creep in, the gentle curve of her smile, the thoughtful tilt of her head, the warmth in her voice when she spoke softly, almost confidingly. It wasn't just physical attraction. That would have been easier to rationalize. No, this was different. It was the way she seemed to understand without judgment, the way she listened as if my thoughts were fragile, precious things she was careful not to break. There was a gravity to her presence that made me feel both exposed and safe, and I hated myself for being so captivated by it. We began to spend more time together in casual settings, helping with chores, running errands, even walking through the nearby park while my girlfriend was busy. Each encounter was loaded with subtle tension. I noticed her hands brushing mine. By accident. The brief closeness when she leaned in to point something out, or the way her gaze lingered just a fraction too long when we laughed. Every touch, every glance felt electric, yet entirely innocuous to anyone else watching. And yet the guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. I loved my girlfriend, or at least I thought I did, and here I was, feeling a pull towards someone I shouldn't. I would catch myself stealing glances at her sister when my girlfriend wasn't looking, observing the way sunlight danced through her hair, the way her lips curved when she smiled, or the quiet way she would fiddle with a piece of jewelry as she thought. These little details became magnified, intimate in a way that terrified me. She seemed aware of it, too, not in an overt way, but in the subtle cues that made my chest tighten. When she spoke, there was a softness, a careful deliberation, as if she, too, felt the weight of unspoken words between us. I could feel her hesitation, the almost imperceptible distance she maintained while still inviting closeness. It was a delicate dance of restraint, each of us aware of the other's presence more than any rational explanation could allow. And yet, despite all the guilt and the conflict, there was a comfort in these stolen moments. In the quiet laughter, the accidental touches, the fleeting glances, I felt alive in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was thrilling and dangerous, but also profoundly human, a messy, complicated tangle of emotion that neither of us knew how to unravel. By the end of that week, I realized something. I couldn't ignore it. This silent, secret connection with my girlfriend's sister was becoming a part of me, threading itself into my daily thoughts and private moments. I didn't know where it would lead, or whether it should, but I knew the tension was only growing, quietly demanding acknowledgement, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep it buried without it spilling over. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world outside seemed to pause. Rain tapped gently against the windows, creating a rhythmic background to the faint hum of the heater. My girlfriend had gone out to visit a friend, leaving her sister and me alone in the house once again. There was an intimacy in the solitude, a stillness that made every sound, every breath, every shift of weight, more pronounced. We had been tidying up the living room together, laughing quietly at small, shared frustrations, when she paused and looked at me. Something in her eyes made me stop mid-motion, a curious intensity that drew me in. I felt my chest tighten as she stepped a fraction closer, the scent of her perfume subtly mingling with the faint smell of the rain-soaked air drifting through the slightly open window. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a weight that made me listen intently. "This will stay between us." I froze, unsure how to respond. Her words hung in the air, vibrating with unspoken meaning. She didn't need to explain. I understood immediately. She was trusting me, creating a bond that existed entirely in the quiet, delicate space between us. There was no overt confession of feelings, no reckless flirtation, just the raw honesty of a shared secret. The moment stretched. She adjusted her stance, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine. It was accidental, or maybe not, but it sent a shiver through me, a quiet thrill that made my pulse quicken. I could feel the warmth of her arm against mine, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the soft tilt of her head as she watched me, gauging my reaction. I wanted to reach out, to let my hand linger against hers, but restraint held me back. Part of the thrill was in the tension, in the space between desire and propriety. Her eyes softened, and she gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't playful, it was gentle, reassuring, full of quiet trust. I felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness, a desire to honor the fragile connection she had extended. This wasn't about fleeting attraction, it was about understanding, about a moment of mutual vulnerability that neither of us had planned for but both recognized. We continued our work in silence, yet the room felt charged. Every movement, every brush of clothing or hand, seemed amplified. I noticed her presence in ways I hadn't before, the subtle curve of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the dim light, the calm steadiness in the rise and fall of her chest. I was acutely aware of the shared space, of the unspoken promise, and of the delicate tension that now existed between us. By the time the rain slowed to a drizzle, the secret hung between us like a fragile thread, unspoken, unbroken, and profoundly intimate. I left that evening with a strange combination of exhilaration and guilt, knowing that what had begun as an ordinary visit had shifted into something charged with emotion, trust, and unacknowledged longing. That whispered promise wasn't just a few words, it was a key, a subtle unlocking of a connection that neither of us could ignore. After that rainy evening, everything between us seemed subtly altered. The house no longer felt ordinary. Each room held the echo of that whispered promise. My girlfriend's sister had trusted me, and the weight of that trust created a quiet intimacy I hadn't expected, or wanted to ignore. I found myself seeking moments alone with her, small windows of time that felt impossibly precious. It began with mundane activities, making coffee together on lazy mornings, rearranging a bookshelf, or stepping outside to grab fresh air in the backyard. Yet even these ordinary moments were charged. When we sat side by side, our knees brushing lightly against each other, it was electric. Not in a reckless way, but in a way that made my heart race and my chest tighten. The warmth of her presence seemed to seep into my skin, grounding me, yet also stirring something I struggled to name. One afternoon, we lingered over coffee, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. She spoke softly about her loneliness, the quiet moments of doubt that no one else saw. I listened, trying not to betray the fascination in my gaze, yet every subtle gesture of hers, the way her fingers traced the rim of her mug, the slight crease between her eyebrows as she considered her words, the soft sigh when she finished a thought, felt intimate. I wanted to reach out, to brush a stray strand of hair behind her ear, but I restrained myself, savoring the tension, the closeness, without crossing a line. She noticed the silence in me, the way I sometimes stared at her when I thought she wasn't looking. With a soft smile, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine as she passed the sugar bowl. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but it lingered in my mind far longer than it lasted in reality. I felt the quiet thrill of connection, the deep satisfaction of being seen, truly seen, by someone who understood more than I could put into words. We began sharing more, not just our small, daily frustrations, but memories, regrets, dreams we rarely voiced aloud. She spoke with honesty, revealing cracks in her otherwise confident exterior. I found myself reciprocating, sharing parts of myself that I usually kept hidden. Each confession, each laugh shared over trivialities or small heartbreaks, added layers to our connection. There was a rhythm developing between us, a give and take, a silent understanding that neither of us had to label or define. By the end of the day, the house felt warmer, quieter, as if it recognized the unspoken intimacy between us. Her presence was a balm, soothing and yet stirring emotions I hadn't anticipated. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every quiet laugh was a thread weaving a subtle, intricate bond. I felt a mixture of exhilaration and restraint, wanting to linger, to reach closer, yet knowing the importance of patience, of honoring the fragile trust that had been built between us. And in that delicate balance, between longing and restraint, trust and desire, I realized that what we were building was profound. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't fleeting. It was a slow, careful intertwining of two hearts, marked by honesty, subtle affection, and the quiet thrill of unspoken understanding. And I knew, deep down, that these stolen moments would linger far longer than either of us could ever admit aloud. The quiet intimacy we had been cultivating began to feel precarious. It was impossible to ignore how much I thought about her, how easily my gaze lingered when my girlfriend wasn't looking, or how the simplest touches from her sister sent a rush of warmth through me. What had started as fleeting curiosity had grown into something undeniably real, and undeniably complicated. One evening, my girlfriend noticed a subtle shift in me. I tried to hide it, laughed a little too long at jokes, hesitated before answering questions, and found myself distracted by memories of lingering glances and soft touches. There was a tension in the house that hadn't been there before, a subtle undercurrent that neither my girlfriend nor her sister could have put into words, but which I felt in every heartbeat. Her sister, too, seemed aware of it. Not in any dramatic way, but in the almost imperceptible gestures. The way she would pause near me, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine, the way her gaze seemed to hold for just a moment longer than necessary. We both knew that each glance, each fleeting touch, carried weight far beyond the moment itself. There was excitement, yes, but also guilt, restraint, and the knowledge that boundaries were at risk of being crossed. It came to a head one afternoon while helping her reorganize a few boxes in the attic. The space was dimly lit, dust motes floating in the streaks of sunlight that filtered through the small window. We were crouched side by side, reaching for the same object, and our hands touched. This time, the contact lingered longer than usual, almost deliberate, and I could feel the heat of her skin through the fabric of our clothes. My pulse quickened, and I could sense her hesitation mirrored in my own reflection, the thrill, the guilt, the desire, all swirling together. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken acknowledgement of what we were both feeling. I could see it in the subtle curve of her lips, the quiet exhales she released as if to steady herself, the way her eyes searched mine for understanding. Every instinct screamed at me to step closer, to let the tension spill over, but the weight of conscience, of respect for my girlfriend and the boundaries we had yet to honor, held me back. By the time we emerged from the attic, the room seemed charged, as if the very walls had absorbed the tension between us. Outside, the rain had returned, tapping a soft rhythm against the windows, mirroring the turbulence I felt inside. We moved through the house with an awareness of each other that was impossible to ignore, each gesture, each accidental brush of hands a reminder of the delicate line we were walking. That night, I lay in bed replaying every glance, every brush of skin, every quiet laugh we had shared. I was caught between longing and guilt, exhilaration and restraint. I realized, painfully, that our connection was no longer something I could dismiss as harmless. The emotional stakes had risen, and both of us knew that the path ahead would require careful navigation, honesty, and self-restraint, or risk unraveling the fragile trust and intimacy we had painstakingly built. The tension that had been quietly building over weeks reached its quiet crescendo one evening. The house was still, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun filtering through the curtains. My girlfriend was occupied with a late work call, giving her sister and me a rare, uninterrupted moment together. It was time for honesty, not dramatic declarations, but a gentle, careful acknowledgement of what had been growing between us. We sat on the porch, the air carrying the soft scent of evening rain and the faint perfume she always wore. The silence stretched comfortably at first, a shared space where words were unnecessary. Then, slowly, she spoke, her voice low and calm, yet full of gravity. She confessed, in quiet, measured sentences, how she had noticed the subtle tension between us, how she had felt it too, and how complicated it had become. She didn't demand an answer, she only offered truth, a bridge over the uncertainty that had filled so many of our stolen moments. I listened, my heart pounding, aware of the nearness of her presence. Her hand rested lightly on the railing, and I shifted slightly closer, so that our shoulders touched. The contact was deliberate enough to be intimate, yet gentle enough to respect boundaries. I wanted to speak, to pour out all the thoughts and emotions that had tangled inside me for weeks. But I also knew this moment required care, not rush. Slowly, I admitted my own feelings, my fascination, my admiration, and the strange, unignorable pull I had felt since the first day we met. As we spoke, our eyes met, and there was no embarrassment, no awkwardness, only understanding. The secret promise she had whispered weeks ago, "This will stay between us," had transformed into something more profound. It wasn't about secrecy or forbidden longing anymore. It was about mutual respect, trust, and emotional closeness. The thrill remained, but it was tempered by honesty and maturity. At one point, she reached out, her hand brushing against mine. The touch was soft, fleeting, yet it carried warmth and reassurance. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the moment linger, absorbing the quiet intimacy, the unspoken acknowledgement that our connection was real, significant, and yet contained. No dramatic gestures, no impulsive actions, just the slow, deliberate closeness that had defined our story from the beginning. We stayed on the porch as the sky darkened, speaking of lighter things, sharing small jokes, and laughing softly. The atmosphere was warm, human, and deeply comforting. In her presence, I felt a serenity I hadn't anticipated, a sense that this bond, though unconventional, was a rare and beautiful thing, built on honesty, empathy, and subtle affection. By the time my girlfriend returned, the porch felt full yet empty, complete yet open. We had acknowledged our feelings, honored our boundaries, and strengthened a connection that would remain quietly alive between us. There was no need for secrecy to feel thrilling anymore. The trust, respect, and emotional intimacy we had nurtured were enough. As I left that evening, the brush of her hand against mine, the warmth of her smile, and the subtle weight of our shared understanding lingered with me. It was a slow-burn romance resolved not with passion or drama, but with quiet, profound human connection, one that would remain etched in memory, tender and enduring, long after the story ended. As I left that evening, the brush of her hand against mine, the warmth of her smile, and the quiet weight of our shared understanding lingered with me. It was a slow-burn connection, resolved not with drama, but with honesty, trust, and deep emotional intimacy, a moment I would never forget. If you've ever felt the quiet tension of unspoken feelings, or been drawn to someone in a way that words can't capture, this story will stay with you too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another slow-burn romance story. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had a secret connection that changed everything?